Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain and logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Ty Bordner, who's Senior VP of Marketing and Business Development at Amber Road. And today we're going to talk about digitizing the global supply chain. Now, this is a topic that continues to generate a lot of interest and discussion in the industry. And in reality, it's really about a transformation journey. And although there's a lot of great potential benefits at the end of that journey, a lot of companies are asking a question, which is, am I ready to embark on this journey? What are some of the prerequisites that are required before taking that first step? And, once we go on this journey and take those steps, what are the different ways that we can actually, derive value? So those are some of the questions we're going to kind of touch upon in today's episode. And it's great to, have Ty on the program to share his insights and perspective on this topic. So Ty, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot, Adrian. It's good to be here.
Now, Ty, you're a first-time guest here on Talking Logistics, and like I always like to do whenever we bring in a new guest, I'm always curious in terms of, how people got involved with supply chain logistics to begin with. So before we dive into kind of digital supply chain here, why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved in supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Amber Road?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I started out in school. I was studied math and computer science, so a bit of a geek. And my first job was with GE coming out of school, working for a company in Rockville, Maryland called GE Information Services, a small division of GE. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I guess I was already in the supply chain and didn't realize it. So GE IS, or GEIS as it was called, was really doing a lot of EDI transactions, was the main part of their business. So, what used to be called a van, exchanging a lot of electronic information. And again, unbeknownst to me, this was a lot of stuff around the global supply chain, purchase orders and ASNs and some other things. So I'd worked there for about 7 years, and then I got recruited to go to it was mid-90s, remember, which was a crazy time in the IT world. So I got recruited to go to this small company called Export Software International, and which ultimately, a few years later after I joined them, we renamed it Vastera. So, and at the time, by the name, you can tell it was really only focused on exports, but over time, it was really all aspects of global trade and the supply chain. So I sort of fell into it in that regard. And, one thing led to another. I spent 10 years at Vastera, and I've been at Amber Road now for over 12 years. So really been in the hardcore, I guess, global supply chain space for over 22 years.
Well, yeah, great. That's why I love asking this question, just to see the, the different journeys there. And, I'm also, an engineer, by background, and I started my career at Motorola in new product development and manufacturing. So I always tell folks, I was in supply chain before I even knew what supply chain was,
Exactly. Yeah, me
back
too.
then. And, as an industry analyst now for, over 19 years, I remember Vastera in those days, and certainly now Amber Road kind of being, in the forefront of what's happening in the global trade arena here. So welcome on this journey.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the topic at hand here. Like I said, a lot of discussion these days about, digitizing, the supply chain, but, what exactly, does that mean? I mean, how do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word digitizing, and as the Europeans say, digitalizing, and it's such a big word, and it means so many different things to so many different aspects of business. And of course, today it's really, I think, maybe the largest theme that's really involved in all parts of business, not just the supply chain. And of course, at Amber Road, we focus on the global supply chain. So I'll try to phrase my comments in terms of the global supply chain. I think for people that are trying to digitize around the global supply chain, it's really about eliminating paper, right? It's about, and I say paper, it's, PDF files or Word documents, or even, frankly, emails, certainly, and even spreadsheets can be equated to paper or paper-like. It means you can't process these things in an automated, digital way. They may be digital in a sense, right? A PDF file is digital, but it's not truly digitalized in the sense that I can't have a software program that does something with it. So it really starts with just eliminating the paper and building a model that is robust relative to your realm. So if we're talking global supply chain, we're talking about a model that can deal with all the aspects of global trade, of the global supply chain, which is big. I'm not discounting it. It's a big task. But it's being able to structure this data that was formerly on paper or in Word documents or in Excel spreadsheets or perhaps even, some small access databases, and putting it into a structure that is the model of the realm, in this case, the global supply chain. So, that's the beginning of digitization. I mean, you can digitize your processes by doing that. And then, of course, there's a lot of things after that result in real value. But, doing that, having a master database of your, again, master data, product data for the most part, but it's also your entities that you're dealing with, could be your partners, your 3PL providers, forwarders, brokers, but even your customers and your suppliers in a master database. And, as I'm sure we'll talk later throughout this discussion, that, that really is the key to unlocking the value through digitization.
Yeah, no, you brought up a lot of great points there, and I think this whole area of one of the things that kind of came to my mind as you're talking there, in terms of moving away from kind of these paper-based documents or even PDFs and things like that they may be electronic in one form, but really I think what it is you hear so much talk about today the importance of having the ability to make smarter and faster business decisions, and you talk about business intelligence and analytics. And in many ways, the precursor to be able to do that is you have to be able to have that information, that data in a format, in a form, in an aggregated way, to be able to do that analysis, be able to, see those opportunities out there. Otherwise, if it's spread around many different electronic documents or things like that, you just really can't get that complete view, particularly when you're talking about global supply chain, where you're dealing with so many different trading partners and so many different entities that are involved in that whole end-to-end process, right?
That's exactly right. That's the key. That's the key.
So I think that leads me to my next question. I mean, where does the journey, ultimately begin? I mean, in other words, what are there any, almost like when you're taking a college course, are there any prerequisites, to getting on this journey?
Yeah, class 101, right? What is 101? Well, like I said, you got to have a digital model that can structure the data. Without that, it's hard to unlock it. But, when you start to think about what are then the things that you can do with that data to start to begin to unlock the value, we've kind of classified it into three areas. And you mentioned one of them already, analytics. But, we look at things in three ways. We look at collaboration. Clearly in the supply chain realm and global supply chain realm, sharing information with others is a good practice, right? It's part of, in essence, what the supply chain is. And certainly as you look at it from a global perspective, it gets even more important because, you have more parties that are involved in a global move, and they're spread out across the world, and you may not be able to walk across the street and talk to them, right? They're all over the world. They speak different languages and different time zones. So collaboration is one of the elements. If I can go into that a little bit, we kind of break it up into two ways. If you think about collaboration, one way is, I'll label it visual collaboration, which means, certainly with the advent of the internet and web browsers, we can put things on a screen. So now we can collaborate with people by sharing information on a web browser. Of course, you have to have the right security to make sure that people only see the data that they need to see. But this is what we're talking about here with regard to visual collaboration, sharing that information, not just making it visible and read only, but also collecting information from the extended supply chain partners, your suppliers, your brokers, forwarders, et cetera. And the other way to collaborate is through electronically, right? So we're really talking about, going back to my beginnings at GE or at Geis, is sharing information, whether that's through EDI or certainly today. You've got XML, and maybe there's some other ways that are starting to evolve too right now, some of the new things that are happening that you can start to share information electronically. So, you're basically eliminating the rekeying of this data over and over and over again. And certainly that takes resources and manpower to do that. It takes time, which slows things down, but it also causes errors, right? People rekey data, they're making mistakes, not because they want to, just because it happens, right? So if I can have data and I can collect it one time, I can share it via my web browser through if you will, portals. And I can then also share that information electronically with, whatever means necessary. Then I'm really creating a lot of value and efficiency. The
You know,
second, well, sorry, that was just the first way.
yeah. So before
Yeah.
you get into the other two ways, just a quick
Yeah.
question there on the
Mhm.
collaboration piece.
Mhm.
I actually wrote a blog post this week on blockchain. I mean, there's a lot of hype and a lot of discussion on blockchain, and I think there are a lot of opportunities, but there's also a lot of challenges associated with blockchain. But is this an area in terms of the collaboration piece, particularly with the exchange of data and the different documents involved and everything else? Is this an area that you see blockchain potentially have a role in?
Yes, I do. I think that, first of all, the blockchain things that are popping up all over are very varied, right? So it's not one type of thing. But I think, some of the things that are ongoing, I mean, you may have seen IBM and Maersk are formed a joint venture to do some things. And if you look at and study what they're doing, I think a large part of what their goal is and initiative is collaboration, right? Is being able to share this information to the various parties across the supply chain that need to see it at the right time. So yes, I think something like that is exactly what I'm talking about, and that was actually a reference. So one of the new ways is I think the blockchain to help facilitate that.
Great. So we talked about collaboration. What are the other two ways to kind of
Yeah,
derive
yeah.
value from
So the
this?
second way that we said three ways. The second way is what we call automation, which again is certainly a term being used today. And sometimes I think it gets mixed up with artificial intelligence and machine learning and automation. I kind of forget those three things. And I'll put artificial intelligence and machine learning in their own bucket. But, automation is just old-fashioned, good old-fashioned automation. I mean, it's just letting a piece of computer software, do something in an instant that might take a human being a significant amount of time to go do. Whether that's sending an alert at the right time in an automated way to the people that need to get that alert. Maybe the alert says, hey, my supplier is not going to deliver on the order that they said they were going to deliver because I see the information that's in the system and they don't have the raw materials on hand right now to make that delivery on Friday, as an example. Or it could be an alert that says, hey, the ocean vessel is 2 hours outside the port. And I know through maybe some predictive analytics that I know how long it will take to get through customs, and it'll get there 3 hours from now. And I can send alert to the drayage company to have their truck ready, have their truck come pick up the goods 3 hours, right? I can send an alert to the warehouse or the distribution center where those goods are destined that in 5 hours from now, they better have X amount of staff on hand to be able to unload the truck and have a forklift operator available. So we're starting to get to where we can really optimize these kinds of human resources. And of course, it's always good to know when things are going to be late or delayed as well. And another big thing just in the global trade world is, as I'm sure the viewers know, handling the global trade regulations, export import regulations is becoming more and more and more difficult. So from an automation standpoint, software today can look at what you're moving, where you're moving it from, to what it is, and tell you in an instant what are the pieces of data that you need to clear customs on the import side, or to, what do you need to do on the export side to get those goods out of the country. And so automating that process isn't just a labor or a workforce reduction, it's managing risk, making sure that you're doing the right thing, and also just providing a way to do this globally. I just don't know how you hire enough people today that know all the regulations all over the world. It becomes a real just plain old difficult task to do that. So automation helps in that regard.
Right, and those regulations are changing all the time too. So.
Exactly. So it's hard to keep up, right? Thanks. Yeah, thanks for making that point. And the third way is, as you mentioned early in the discussion here, is analytics. And it's, the ability to gain value out of, first of all, again, you need that database, right? You need the database that has the central location of all this data and have it digitized, digitally mastered, if you will, and have the transaction history. So as you start to then process your export and import transactions all over the world, and you have all the data about those transactions, how long it took each transaction to get from point A to point B. You can connect the purchase orders to the factory orders to the, one-to-many shipments, or frankly, many-to-one shipments, because sometimes they get consolidated. But then you can track the movement of those goods throughout the world, and then you can, of course, track the movement all the way and until final payment. So having a database of all that information is, as you might imagine, is incredibly valuable. And you can start to mine that data for all sorts of things. You can start to look at, what might have been my opportunity to look at all my goods that I've moved over the last year or 2 years or whatever, and what trade agreements may they have been eligible for. And then I can take that information and see, well, I might have been leaving, 10, 20, 30, or $100 million worth of duties that I could have saved if I would have taken advantage of a trade agreement. You can start to look at your suppliers and look back to their tiered suppliers, so who are their suppliers and so forth, and get a handle on the amount of risk that might exist in your supply chain. There's really all sorts of analytics. We won't be able to discuss all of them here, but the ability to have those things at your fingertips is key. And so, the three areas, again, collaboration, automation, and analytics are the three key areas that we think just about everything falls into one of those categories in terms of digitizing the global supply chain.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great kind of framework or way to think about things. Certainly, collaboration. It's one of those terms that it gets used a lot, in the industry. But really, at the foundation of collaboration is one, the ability to connect or get integrated with your trading partners and be able to exchange information in a timely manner with all of them, so everyone's working off the same version of the truth, if you will, and then you're able to not only see the information, perhaps through the analytics and BI pieces of it, but then be able to take some action, on that. And inevitably, when you talk about global supply chains, it's not one entity that needs to take action. It's usually multiple entities that need to take action, and being able to synchronize that and through a platform, I think is critical. Then automation, I think, to your point, there are so many moving parts to a global supply chain that I love that you say, I don't think a company can hire enough people, if they had to do this manually or do it all. Even something as simple as, not really simple, but even something like, doing a restricted party screening, if that's something that's not automated in some way, that can considerably bog down the whole process.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, I mean, we can't automate everything, right? It's at least not for a while. But we want to do a process by exception. So let the software do what it can do, and when it can't have an answer, for instance, restricted party screening, the software can only detect that the name and address that's in there might be a restricted party. Can never really be 100% sure. Some people have names that are similar or the same as people on the list, but we like to kick that out then to a human being to make that final decision. And of course, there's a lot of examples around that. But yes, automation is valuable and important.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point around exception management, because I think really that's the ultimate goal that I hear from a lot of companies is, we want to really focus on those things that are truly exceptions, which are, let's just say for the sake of argument, the 80-20 rule, right? All that 80% of the stuff that, is running fine, let it go, right? Let it move, let it be automated, let it run as smoothly as possible. Let's focus our resources, on that 20% of those things that really need our attention. So based on the companies that you work with, and companies that are kind of further along on this journey, what are some of the actual value or benefits that they've been achieving? I mean, what are some of those key metrics that are getting, positively impacted here?
Yeah, I think there's, kind of two really big ones, and then there's maybe one sort of overarching one, but just efficiency, right? I mean, that's really what this does, right? It creates efficiency, and there's many different ways. I mean, there's hard dollar efficiency, just hard dollar savings on, if you can provide as a company, provide your 3PLs, mostly I'm talking about the forwarders and the carriers. If you can provide them a rich, robust electronic transaction that is the movement of the goods, the shipment, whether it be an outbound movement or a customs entry on the inbound side for the broker, I mean, you have saved them a ton of work, right? So, they're charging you a certain amount of dollars today, but it's difficult for them. I mean, they got a lot of folks that are picking up the phones, making phone calls to, you, and maybe asking for things like, what's the valuation for this, or what's the proper classification, or what goods are, what are these things, and all sorts of other things. And so if you can give them the electronic data, they don't have to key it in. They know it's accurate because you know it's accurate. You're giving it to them. You know, their workload goes down, so you can reduce your fees that you're paying them, and they'll gladly reduce the fees. They'll probably make more margin on the you know, their work, but they'll certainly reduce their costs of having people, you know, run around, get answers. And frankly, I mean, even you know, these guys will admit, I mean, a lot of the mistakes are made, as I said earlier, by rekeying data and just having to make a decision, you know, because the goods need to move. So we got to make a decision. And, you know, if you get that decision wrong, well, that really comes back to bite you later with a lot extra costs. So, so efficiency, I mean, but there's all kinds of, all kinds of efficiency. I mean, part of what this does, the digitizing your supply chain, is it moves goods quicker. Goods don't get stopped. You know, customs isn't asking for info because you've got it all. You've got it up front. You're reusing data over and over again. So you've got all the info, so your goods move through customs. So now you're speeding your supply chain. So, you know, if a typical international supply chain, you know, could be 45, 60 days, right, of from when the goods sort of moved until they were delivered, you might be able to cut 3, 4, 5 days out of that supply chain on average. And the time value of money and you know, just many other things, customer satisfaction, you know, some things are hard to measure, but you know, that really goes up. I mentioned earlier, just looking at things like trade agreements, and once you have your data digitized, you can then see what the opportunity is. And of course, it doesn't mean your goods qualify for a trade agreement, but because your data is digital, you can now determine that digitally, you know, in an instant. So, you know, I think a lot of people don't really go after the value in trade agreements because it's too hard. And again, they don't have their data in a database. Duty deferral schemes, like in the foreign trade zone in the United States, or China has something called processing trade, and many others, and Europe has customs warehousing. You know, this is another aspect of being digital that you can look at and manage your information and take advantage of some cost savings by deferring your duty for a period of time, because it makes sense for your business case. It may not always make sense, but it could. So, I mean, those are just some examples of efficiency. I think the other big thing is risk. You know, once you have a digital supply chain or global supply chain, you can manage your risk. You can understand, you know, certainly from regulation standpoint, everybody kind of understands that, right? Risk, you know, you can eliminate or almost eliminate your risk around not following the regs, because you're having a piece of software, you know, check all these regulations for you. But from a supply chain perspective, I mean, just to make sure that you have a digital record of the audits that your maybe third parties have done against your suppliers, to make sure that they're socially compliant, they're ethical, they're environmentally sound, you know, they've got the correct, fire systems within their factories and things of that. I mean, you don't really want your brand hurt if, you know, something goes wrong and you know, people were using child labor or they had some accident at the facility. So that's one aspect. The other aspect around risk is, again, being able to manage, you know, events or strikes that might occur, to be able to have a handle and the agility for you to maneuver your supply chain to access, you know, new sources quickly, then maybe even in different countries, to be able to identify bottlenecks that might occur in your supply chain, sort of general bottlenecks, but also you could have things that occur because they're weather related, or, you know, years ago, if you remember the volcano eruptions that occurred in Europe that really hurt people's supply chains. But just having a digital database that allows you to react to any sort of external force, whether it be a labor, as I mentioned, a labor force, a strike, or an event, a weather event, or some other thing that you can't even imagine today that could happen, that allows you to then react to that. So I think managing risk in those three areas is also one of the ways to extract value out of digitizing your supply chain.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up risk. I mean, I often equate, you know, global supply chain management with risk management, because, you know, really for all the reasons you brought out, I mean, there's so much, you know, opportunities or potential factors that can disrupt the supply chain, particularly from a global, you know, perspective. And I think there've been studies that shown that any kind of supply chain disruption, you know, ultimately has significant impact on the financials of the company, and, you know, even the brand, right? The brand reputation, what happens with the brand, you know, from which again can have long lasting, you know, effects. You know, the other point you brought up in terms of reducing, you know, the opportunities to take days out of the end-to-end supply chain. I mean, that is huge. And that's one area that I know when a lot of companies are looking at the business value or trying to quantify the value, just the amount of inventory that they're able to take out of the system. Because now if they've got more reliability and more true visibility in terms of how long, it is, and they're able to take days out equates to millions of dollars of
Yeah,
inventory that
exactly.
they have in safety
Yeah,
stock that they can
yeah.
kind of reduce down a little bit. So that's a huge, the inventory management piece is another huge area, as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I've neglected to mention that, but absolutely. Yeah.
So, we've talked about a lot of things here. I mean, so what's next on the journey? I mean, what new technologies or capabilities or opportunities are there that, when you, within the context of digitizing the supply chain that companies ought to be thinking about?
Yeah, we talked about one of them. We talked about the blockchain. So we'll see where that goes. Certainly at Amber Road, we really think that could make a difference, right? If we have a way to for our customers to leverage the digital data that's in their system, our system, to be able to then more easily communicate that information through a blockchain capability to all the players around the world, and do that in a secure way. A secure way. Wow, we think that could really change the game, change the world. So we're excited about the opportunities to participate in that particular technology. I think IoT, Internet of Things, which is certainly a very, very, very broad topic, but with regard to the global supply, what it mostly means is the ability to automatically provide updates to the movement of goods. And there may be other paradigms and other use cases, but and not just the location of the goods, but the maybe even the status of the goods, right? Temperature and some other things that I think IoT can provide. So today or in the past, let me say, the way that folks were doing this was through EDI, right? And EDI isn't going away. I mean, I don't know if people out there think that EDI is going to go away. I'm certainly in the camp that says it won't go away. But if we can, start with a transaction that may be the purchase order or an ASN or the information that represents a good bit about the shipment, augment it in an automated way with product attribute data that's sitting in this digital master database, and augment it with other rules that run against the transaction. And then, leverage this digital information to be able to communicate that. To be able to then take the IoT data like in a very easy way. I can now track ships and containers as they move throughout the world, or will be able to track that in the near future. Then that's just a more efficient way of getting the data. Now you still need to relate that event data back to the order, the shipment, the customs entry, the bill of lading. I mean, there's so many different kinds of transactions that really represent a global move. You can't just have, where's that container? And you need to know what's in the container, what orders are in the container, again, what customs entries are in the container. And when you can start to do that, then you really start to leverage value, create value. So, IoT, blockchain, as I mentioned earlier, artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think are also important and very valuable. I don't want to mix those up with pure automation though, because I don't think they're the same thing. But one of the things I mentioned earlier, being able to look at historical data of moves to ports or through customs or certain commodities and what they do, and then starting to predict how long things take. Predictive analytics is a bit of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I think that's going to grow, and that's going to get more and more important over time. And then maybe, quote, big data. Maybe it's not so new anymore, right? It's kind of been around for a few years. So, but really looking at the analytics across all of your global supply chain data, but then maybe combining that with some external data that may not sit in a global supply chain, pricing info or some other things that you might have, and starting to really correlate these things together and even getting further insight out of that, I think are some of the things that these new technologies are coming and will come.
Yeah, no, I think you hit a lot of the top ones, on my list as well. Certainly with machine learning and big data, the combination of those two things. I think where I'm seeing a lot of the momentum today is on that predictive analytics, right? That to be able to predict ETAs. They continuously update ETAs, estimated times of arrival,
Yeah, exactly.
as one example. With regards to blockchain, again, even though I kind of have I wear two hats. One of them I see a lot of potential. Other ones I see some skepticism. Along in it. But I think in the arena of global trade, in particular, because there are already customs agencies, both the U.S. and around the world, are looking at blockchain. And because I see a value proposition there when you're talking about all the different documents that are involved from a smart contract standpoint, when you're thinking about commercial invoices and bills of lading and everything else, being able to tie all that together in a secure way and have the importer, the exporter, the logistics providers, everyone kind of in a blockchain, if you will, with that information being all tied together, I can certainly see the value proposition there. And then you're right, IoT. I mean, it's something that's been an evolving category, but I think we'll continue to see more and more examples of automated data capture and that data being able to feed into the systems to enhance the real-time analytics and real-time visibility of what's happening in the global supply chain. So we're running short on time here, Ty. So I'm just going to go right to my last question here. I mean, as a way to kind of wrap up, I mean, what questions should companies ask themselves to assess whether they are on their kind of digitizing the supply chain journey, where they're at the beginning, or what prerequisites, like we talked about before, what things that they need and to really get started here and not only get started, but make sure that they continue to evolve in a smart way moving forward.
Yeah, I think honestly, just from what we're seeing, the global supply chain, it's still a green field. I mean, but I think the questions that, executives can ask and people can ask is, just take a look around and what are they doing today? I mean, how much manual work are they doing today? And I think, mostly the answer is going to be quite a bit, right? There are still paper documents. I mean, there's still faxes, right? In the global supply chain, depending on which countries you're dealing with faxes. So I think the first question is to take a survey and just ask the troops, what do you do? How do you actually move goods? And well, I pick up the phone, I print out a document, I DHL the document over to, my, from the supplier to the broker on the other side or whatever. But I think is probably the first question. I think a lot of people think their ERP does this. I think if you're certainly as the higher you're up in an organization, executives probably think, oh, well, okay, I've got Oracle or SAP or some other ERP system, and it does all this. And, as I'm sure Adrian, the fact of the matter is it doesn't do this stuff. And so I think that's just another question to start to ask to understand, where they are today. One question I find interesting that really is a reveal for I think executives is ask, how many customs entries do they process today? How many customs entries by country, export filings and import customs filings, how many do they have? And I'll tell you that when that question's asked, I'm going to say more than 90% of companies can't answer that question, right? And then when you go one step and say, okay, how much duty am I paying? Well, that's also generally not easily answered. And people may, if they get asked that question, they don't have a digital system, they start to scramble and who knows where they're getting the data from and how accurate it is. But I think that's a revealing question that folks can ask to understand, where they stand. If the answer comes back, we don't know, then that, you're not very far along on your digital journey.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean, I think, if you're not able to answer that within, a few clicks or, within a few minutes, and it takes you a week to answer that question, then I think that's a red flag, right?
It tells you where you're at, right? I mean, because if you have a digital system, you should be able to get that answer in an instant, right?
Right.
You don't even need to ask the question because you already knew the answer before you asked it. But, so I don't know, wrapping up, I guess, I mean, those are some of the things I think, the term control tower was started to be used. I'm sure maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe even longer. I think when we think about the global supply chain and the digitizing that supply chain, we think about a control tower. And I'm not talking about a control tower that's a visibility read-only control tower. I'm talking about a control tower that's alive and living and allows for action. So it does create visibility. You can see through your control tower, but you can also, direct, the airplanes, if you will. You can direct things to happen, take action, And so having that sort of holistic, centralized, global view of everything that's happening in your global supply chain, from sourcing through logistics to trade, I think is where we want to go, and is where we want, ultimately the companies to go to create all this value.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points there. And then, going back to what we talked about earlier, when you look at that framework of collaboration, automation, right, and analytics, I think that's a good way to kind of ask yourself questions in each of those buckets, if you will, to see where you are today. And I think that will, provide a good, path forward, or at least, some direction on where you should be focusing your efforts. Well, Ty, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics. And certainly, the global supply chain and digitizing the global supply chain is such a broad and meaty topic that we could probably have a whole 2-day conference on this whole topic, right? But I think you provided some great insights and advice and perspective on this. So thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Amber Road website or on the Talking Logistics website, and you've got a question or a comment for Ty, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.